33 House Republicans voted for this bill. The bill would extend VAWA for 5 years through 2024. A little bit of history. This bill was signed into law by President Clinton in 1994. It's been reauthorized 3 times. It's not permanent. It has to be reauthorized in 2000, 2005, and 2013. It expired, as I said, February 15th of this year. Funding continues, but key improvements are being delayed by lack of reauthorization. There are 3 new key provisions. 1, it strengthens tribal sovereignty. I come from the state of California. We have the largest American Indian population in the United States in our state. And this allows tribes to prosecute non-Indians for sexual violence, stalking, sex trafficking, and obstruction of justice on their land. In California, we have 360,000 Indians who are residents, citizens, and live in our state. The bill, secondly, provides protections for LGBT people. It explicitly states that grant recipients can train staff to prevent LGBT discrimination. And the gun provision is very simple. It adds dating partners who have convictions of domestic violence to the category of people barred from having handguns. It also adds stalking problems, stalking conditions. The fact of the matter is that for women, guns in a household are extraordinarily difficult. And the gun is the weapon first gone to many times when violence against women takes place. So this is a bill that we should really pass. Women are a majority of the population. When I came to the Senate, there were 2, and now we have 24 women in the United States Senate. So things are changing, I hope, with the women as well as with the solid Democratic support that we will be able to pass this bill. It's going up next year. Good. And now, if I might introduce our distinguished leader from the great state of New York.
Go ahead, Charles.
I didn't want to offend you.
No, you never offend me.
Go
But do you
ahead.
want to have the women go first?
No, go ahead.
All right. All right. I will be brief. Okay, thank you, Senators Feinstein, Hirono, and Klobuchar, who we called Amy K., even though she's not in a Franz Kafka novel, as well as Senators Udall and Leahy. Yes, she sort of is. Good point. It's been 223 days since the House passed the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization. 223 days since the House, Democrats and Republicans, in a large bipartisan vote, sent to the Senate the bipartisan bill that would better protect women who have endured domestic violence. Senator McConnell continues to block the bill. It was one of the first items in his legislative graveyard, and it remains there, as does everything else. The bill isn't controversial. It says if you're assaulted by your domestic partner or a former partner, not just a spouse, you're protected. The updated legislation says if you stalked your partner or have a restraining order against you, you shouldn't be able to purchase a firearm. Some of the bull I've heard from the other side, oh, someone will say that they're stalking and prevent them. No, there has to be a conviction of a certain sort to make it work. So this is not loosely drawn at all. But Leader McConnell is so hell-bent on blocking bipartisan bills that would help the American people, and in this case actually save lives, he's willing to tell women seeking protection from abusive partners, you're on your own. That's reminiscent of what police departments and men would do for centuries when a woman showed up at a police station battered and bruised. They'd say, you're on your own, go fix it yourself. Of course, we've come a long way, but not long enough. And the amendments that that Senator Feinstein has added in the bill, one of them worked on very hard by Amy K., should be there. We keep wanting to make the bill better and better and better. And let me make a few more quick points. Women of color who experience disproportionate rates of abuse need this legislation authorized. 45% of African American women have experienced sexual assault, intimate partner violence, or stalking at some point in their lives. 1 in 3 Latinas have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner, and 55% of Native American women who we're trying to protect, 1 in 5 Asian and Pacific Islander women have reported experiencing rape, physical violence, or stalking. So it affects women across the country of every race, creed, color, economic level, but particularly minority women. Shame. Shame on Senator McConnell for not bringing this bill to the floor.
The next person is right here, Senator Leahy, and then Senator Klobuchar, Hirono.
Many of you remember that the Senate came together 6 years ago to pass the Leahy-Crapo Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act. Now, at that time, we had people tell us we should have a watered-down version. Senator Crapo and I, joined by every Democrat who was in the Senate at the time, said we should have a tougher bill. We chose to stand by the survivors and the victim services professional who called for legislation that protect all victims. We did that regardless of the immigration status. We removed barriers for sexual orientation, and we included those who were members of an Indian tribe. Now, those same victims and their advocates are calling for further improvements to VAWA. And I'm proud to again stand with them and to stand with my dear friend, Senator Dianne Feinstein, to introduce legislation that's already passed the House with a very strong bipartisan vote. It easily passed the Senate if Senator McConnell would allow it to come to a vote. I think it'll get a majority of senators, and we'll keep working to get the same majority we did before. I want us to reach out to Republicans with the same message we had in 2013 when Senator Crapo and I wrote the update of VAWA. It's not about politics. It's about listening to survivors. It's giving those on the front lines who are working to prevent domestic violence all the tools they need. Now, just like in 2013, this is not our bill, it's a survivor's bill. And I talk with survivors and advocates when I'm home in Vermont. I hear the heartbreaking stories of people trying to rebuild their lives. I remember the days when I was a prosecutor, and we didn't have VAWA, we didn't have the help. And what I would usually see somebody who was a victim was at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, be there with the police. All I could do was order the autopsy on the body that was there before me, because there'd been nowhere for her to go, nowhere to seek help, nowhere. Our bill gives that where. And I remember every single one of those cases. And I thought, why can't we get somebody that they could go to? Because the police, my office, would often hear it for the first time when I'm ordering the autopsy. That's not good enough. So VAWA, what they support, makes a real difference to these survivors and their families. We owe it to them to get it enacted now. This is not a political thing. This is not Republican or Democrat. This is what we do for the people of our country. For God's sakes, bring the bill up and pass it.
All right.
Thank you.
Amy. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Senator Leahy, Senator Feinstein, for your longtime leadership of the Judiciary Committee, and I'm pleased to be here as well with Senator Udall and Senator Shaheen, big supporters of this bill, and Senator Hirono, who's worked with me on this gun provision for a long time when it was only us. And now it actually has gotten strong enough support that it was in the House passed bill, got 33 Republican votes, we should note, and it is time to get this done. So when I was the county attorney in Minnesota's biggest county, we had a poster outside of my door of my office, and it was a picture of a woman who had been beaten up by her spouse, and it had a Band-Aid over her nose. And the words on it read, "Beat your wife, and it's your son that goes to jail." Why? Well, it reminded everyone that domestic violence doesn't just hurt one person. It hurts entire families, entire communities. One study found that kids who see domestic violence witness it are more than twice as likely to commit some kind of violent act themselves. It's the whole community. That's why we work so hard, as Senator Leahy and Senator Feinstein explained, to pass the domestic violence bill back in 2013. We really had to go to the mat, and the big breakthrough to make sure we had the provisions in there on immigration and LGBTQ and on some of the other the tribal provisions. It was when all 20 at the time, 20 women senators, Democrats and Republicans, stood together and said, we are insisting that this be in the bill. Well, we want to see that same kind of action from our Republican colleagues this time. This bill is really quite straightforward, the provision on guns. I actually had someone say to me on the Senate floor, why would guns be in the domestic violence bill? And I'm like, have you seen the statistics on how so many of these tragic relationships end? So what this says is right now in federal law, it only prohibits domestic abusers from buying a gun. These are people who are convicted of domestic abuse if they are married to, lived with, or had a child with the victim. But it completely excludes dating partners. And yet nearly half of the women killed by intimate partners, this is a DOJ statistic, are killed by dating partners. When the Senate Judiciary Committee had a hearing on this bill in 2014, way back then, 2 Republican witnesses agreed that extending the provisions to dating partners would be a good idea. We have that on the record, and we can give it to you if you would like. At the hearing, a conservative sheriff from Racine County said, quote, dangerous boyfriends can be just as scary as dangerous husbands. They hit just as hard, and they fire their guns with the same deadly force. So that's all you need to know about why that boyfriend loophole closure is included in the House-passed bill and in our Senate bill that was just introduced with Senator Feinstein's leadership. So the second part is stalking. Stalking is often the first step in a pattern of behavior that culminates in physical violence. The idea is simple. The bill would stop stalkers from purchasing or possessing a gun. This idea is based on existing law in many states, including my own. It will protect people from gun violence. According to the Center for Disease Control, and we would like them to keep more statistics on gun violence, which would be very helpful in looking for solutions. But according to the CDC, between 2001 and 2010, states that stopped convicted stalkers from owning guns had a gun homicide rate for women that was 28% lower than the national average. Those are those 2 simple provisions that are in this bill that 33 Republicans voted for over in the House. I'll close with this. I started with this idea. It's not just one victim, it's the whole communities. I was reminded of this when I was at a funeral for a police officer in Lake City, Minnesota. He had gone to a scene called by a young woman, the police department, that her boyfriend was abusing her. He shows up, the guy's got a gun, shoots a police officer who's wearing a bulletproof vest, but shoots him in the head. So I'm at that funeral, and I see the widow walk down the aisle of that church with these 2 little boys, her sons, and her little baby in her arms, a little girl in a dress covered in blue and white stars. The last time that family had been in the church was the dad in the front row when the kids were in the nativity play for the church, and they were back for his funeral. That's how it affects the whole community. So we call on our Republican colleagues to not hide in the shadows here, to be willing to at least stand up to the NRA on this very focused provision on stalking and on domestic homicides with this boyfriend loophole and get this done. If 33 of their Republican colleagues in the House will vote for it, come on, we can get this done. Senator Hirono.
Okay, could I have that paper, please?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
There you go.
Maisie.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Feinstein, and all of my colleagues who are here, and so many of the Democratic senators who have signed on to this bill. You've heard all of the arguments for why this bill should pass. Do you know why it's not passing? Because there's a provision that disallows people who have been convicted of misdemeanor stalking from owning guns. Guess what? the NRA, and I guess Mitch McConnell decides this is an expansion of the prohibition on people's so-called right to own guns, which is, by the way, no right is unfettered. So that's why this bill is going nowhere, because it has a provision relating to preventing certain other people who have been convicted or who have certain court protective orders against them from owning guns. That is the only reason that I conclude this bill is not going anywhere. So as Senator Klobuchar mentioned, this is totally kowtowing, submitting to the NRA over the need to protect women, marginalized people in this country, Native American women. By the way, I'm so glad, in 2013, we extended the authority for tribal courts to go after non-Indians who come on to tribal lands and commit domestic violence and sexual offenses. And up to that point, the tribal courts did not have jurisdiction to prosecute these non-tribal perpetrators. So it awaited non-tribal courts to go after these people. And of course, didn't happen. So 2013, we made this provision, and VAWA very critical. And today, with this bill, we're expanding those kinds of protections for people who come onto tribal lands and hurt children, the elderly, and the police. Because as mentioned before, when police show up at domestic violence scenes, it is a very dangerous environment. It's an environment where people shouldn't have guns. And, it's amazing, the statistics relating to violence against American Indians and Alaska Natives. More than 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. This is many times more than in the general population of women. And 96% of American Indian and Alaska Native women who suffer sexual violence were victimized by a non-Indian. That is why it was so important to make those changes in 2013. This is a result of victim groups coming forward to tell us there are other loopholes that we need to close to protect victimized people in this country, whether you're a woman, whether you're a dating partner, whether you're a child, senior, police officer. There are a lot of people in this country who are subjected to gun violence, and this is a bill that will close some of those loopholes so that we can protect our people. And that is why this bill is going nowhere. The NRA, once again, has its way. It's time to stop that. I want to thank my colleagues.
Thank you. Let me just mention that there were 3 ranking members that really helped with this. One of them is Senator Udall, the other Senator Brown, and one Senator Murray. And, why are they leaving?
Well,
So I was going to introduce next Senator Udall.
okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay, well, I really wasn't on your schedule, but happy to just say a couple of words. First of all, this is the issue of tribal sovereignty, and we need to make sure that this bill is reauthorized so that Native women on reservations and across the country and in Native communities are protected. Maisie told you the statistics. They're overwhelming, and it's just an outrage. That Senator McConnell, the majority leader, this goes into his graveyard, and he won't let it come out. And that message has to get out there loud and clear. One little story: when I was a prosecutor and attorney general, the way it used to be, when police officers would go to a door in terms of domestic violence, they would say, "Keep it down." They'd go knock on the door, they'd see that there was a real problem, and they would say, "Keep it down." And that's how much law enforcement was involved. No longer is that the case. We have VAWA, we've moved forward in a very, very dramatic way, but we still have a long way to go. And so it's such an honor to work with the women that are here, with the women across the Senate that are standing up, and with all of us that care about making sure that we do away with domestic violence and domestic abuse. Thank you, Senator Feinstein.
Thank you. Any questions? If there are, please, woman first.
she was on the floor last week saying that negotiations fell apart. I wanted to see if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, because you guys were working together for a while on this.
Yes.
What has happened that you're not going to be able to?
Well, I'm not going to obviously go into the details, but the months went on, and I say it's been 8 months since it passed the House. In the meantime, the bill goes into more and more jeopardy the longer it waits. So it was obvious that we weren't going to come to an agreement at that time. So I indicated to her that I was going to introduce it and happy to continue meeting. The 3 points, I think, are the points of issue, and we've asked for some response from the other side, but haven't gotten one to date. So I am hopeful that this will continue to go on. Yes, sir?
The last bill, the last reauthorization took several years. There was a lot of bipartisan negotiations. The fact that, both sides have kind of retreated into their camps at this point, how do you break that up and actually get a bill that can pass the House, the Senate, and get signed by the President?
Well, I think the fact that this passed the House with such a substantial margin, and the fact that there are 33 Republicans from the House who voted for it, really are your answer. This is not a Republican or a Democratic bill. This is a survivor bill.
And I'd also add, there's a lot of individual provisions in here that we haven't discussed that are bipartisan bills, like
Yes.
the Abby Hunnell bill that I did with Senator Cornyn involving police training in rape cases. That's just one. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of bills like that. So a lot of this negotiation has happened. And as Senator Feinstein said, you already saw bipartisan support. The tribal issue is hanging this up, but in a very big way, the NRA. And I would note, I just got hold of the 2019 letter from the NRA to our colleagues against this bill on the House side. And at the bottom it says, due to the importance of this issue, votes on this legislation will be considered in future candidate ratings and endorsements by the NRA Political Victory Fund. So there's your answer.
It's kind of interesting that what Senator Klobuchar just said, that of all that goes on out there in these relationships, that what it came down to was that one issue, when in fact so many women are killed by guns. And it's tragic. It's a misimpression. The only thing we can do is pass this bill and show through history that it can make a difference. Thanks, everybody.
I just want to add, just so it's crystal 100% clear, the reason this bill isn't going anywhere is because the NRA and the need that Mitch McConnell has to not bring any legislation to the floor that has any gun safety provisions in there. That's the reason. Okay, everybody got that? Yes.
If this doesn't wind up passing, do you think that this is going to become a big talking point during the 2020 senatorial?
We're working on this for real reasons, which is, when Maisie and I have been working on this, as I've mentioned, this hearing back in 2014, so for something like 4 or 5 years, 6 years, I don't know. It's been a long time. So I don't think we were thinking ahead to this moment. No, we were thinking about saving lives.
Thank you all
Okay,
very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you.